I think the challenges is getting the investigators at a level that they needed to be. Came out, a particular firefighter came up to us, and he says, "I couldn't believe what I saw. That's why I put out the call that we needed assistance."
Welcome to Internal Affairs, a police podcast here with the IA guy, and again, another super special guest. He's known as Marty Espinoza, a really good buddy of mine. Look, man, we actually met when I became a new sergeant, and he just started as a sergeant as well. We both got basically promoted at the same time at Pacific Division. We had a great time, and of course, we both ended up in Internal Affairs. We're going to get to know him. Some really good stories. 30-year veteran that just recently retired. Can't wait until the episode starts. So stay tuned. We'll see you soon. Okay, we are back, Code 6, at scene with a really dear good friend of mine, Marty. Hey, man, thanks for coming. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Marlon. It's really good to see you.
Yeah, man. You know what? We're finally enjoying retirement life, and we're going to get into a little journey, a trip down memory lane, because that's where you and I met over at Pacifica Sergeants. But hey, let me ask you right off the bat, because we both worked internal affairs. I just kind of wondering, when you first heard that I was going to start this internal affairs podcast, like, what was your thoughts? Like, what's this guy doing with an internal affairs? And I say that in a jokingly manner because you and I both know it's just a topic that's not really discussed. You know, it's a bit taboo, and, you know, it's kind of bold to have an IA police podcast. What's your thoughts?
Well, you know, honestly, when I heard you were doing this, I thought, how educational for people, because there's a lot of people that don't understand internal affairs, and this really provides them some insight into what internal affairs does. Everybody sees that as taboo, and it's not taboo.
Right. There's a big misconception.
Absolutely.
So on that note, then let's get to it, man. Hey, on a scale of 1 to 10, okay, 10 being the highest, rate the importance of internal affairs in a police department and why.
Well, I would definitely have to say it's a 10.
Okay.
And this is the reason why. I firmly believe that every police department, every police agency has to have a system in place to hold its employees accountable for misconduct. Whether that misconduct is a violation of the law, a violation of a rule or policy within the department, or if it's an employee's conduct that causes or brings and sheds a bad light to the department. And I'll break it down a little bit more. Without internal affairs, you lose transparency. The department loses transparency. Without transparency, you begin to lose public trust. Without public trust, you begin to not solve crimes because you need the community's help to solve crimes. So that being said, if people don't trust the police department, they're less likely to come forward as a witness to a crime, or even victims. They don't want to be victims because they don't trust the police department. So that being said, absolutely, it would have to be a 10.
No, 100%. I think that people, again, like we just mentioned earlier, have this misconception, one, two, about the only thing that bothered me when I worked internal affairs or just getting involved in discipline is that, you know, we keep preaching transparency, and we're not completely transparent. And I say that in a sense that internally we're not, because we don't talk about it. You know, you see officers go through, alleged with serious misconduct, and then we come to find out that that really wasn't the case. And, you know, and so I think that's, for me, that's one of the main reasons why it should be a 10, is because of the way we treat each other. What's your thoughts?
I agree. I think that sometimes, in fact, I was a big proponent of investigators from internal affairs going out to the divisions and educating the officers so that the officers wouldn't think that we were the bad guys. You know, educating them on the system and how the discipline system works within the department.
In addition to that, we don't do a good job informing young officers what internal affairs does. You just retired not too long ago. I retired almost 2 years ago, and I still haven't heard one internal affairs investigator go to the academy at least maybe a 30-minute block to inform recruits about the functions of an internal affairs component. One, two, I totally agree. We don't go to roll calls to how many divisions we have? Like 22?
21 of them.
Yeah,
21.
over 20. Yeah. Can you imagine? We can spend a whole day going from division to division to roll calls and saying, hey, this is what we do, because here's the deal. It's a big machine. I mean, at one point we had, 10,000 plus sworn officers?
Yes.
There's a lot of officers that will go through the entire career without even seeing an IA whatsoever.
Right.
And so, yeah, I appreciate that. I really do. I'm also a big proponent of that. Education's key, and let's move forward. Look, let me ask you this. Fill in the blank. As an internal affairs investigator, my job is to what?
To be a unbiased and neutral fact finder. That is what your job is as an investigator. Yeah.
Okay, so then my follow-up question is, how do you become that?
Well, obviously, it's going to take some training, because most guys that come to internal affairs, they've completed investigations at the divisional level. Mm-hmm. But once they come to internal affairs, that is their primary job. So obviously training. Mm-hmm. But in order to be a neutral fact finder, you have to leave your opinion out of investigations, what you think the outcome should be. You leave that to someone else, and that's an adjudicator. So when you're fact-finding, your job is to interview the complainant. That way you have firsthand knowledge of what the issues are that this person is bringing forth. Then identify the employees involved, collect the evidence, which could be body-worn video, surveillance video, any other civilian or department witness that was there during the alleged misconduct, and put that all together on paper after you interview everyone. Then you interview all the witnesses, and the last person you want to interview is the complainant, or the accused officer himself.
Right. I take it you're speaking from experience, and I beg to ask, do internal affairs investigators that come into internal affairs to do this job function, in your experience, you think they've been prepared to do that job?
There are some that are prepared, but there are some that are not.
Right.
It just depends on their individual experience and what kind of jobs they've had prior to coming to internal affairs.
Yeah. I always thought to myself, well, you tell me this, what traits and characteristics do you look for in someone to do this job?
Well, I mean, obviously work ethic is very, very important in every single aspect of our job, right?
Yeah.
Work ethic. One of the things that I like to see is a little bit of experience in investigations, right? You have detectives that we bring in, Detective 2s, and they have investigative experience. That doesn't mean that they have internal affairs investigative experience,
Right.
but at least they have that experience. Sergeants that are field sergeants, and they know how to talk to the public, and they've dealt with other personnel complaints. And then we have sergeants that work complaint units at the divisional level. Yeah. And I like recruiting some of those sergeants.
Yeah, you know what? Would you agree with me if one of those traits was someone who's gone through the whole system, the whole process from beginning to end?
Yes, I would agree that would be good.
That would be a good trait.
They know the process. However, I think that it depends on the misconduct and whether it was sustained or not.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's obviously limitations as to misconduct that has occurred.
Yeah. Oh no,
whether
totally.
or not they can work that assignment.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, we're talking, and just to kind of educate the crowd a little bit. Look, if you get a sustained complaint for a violation of a policy or a procedure or something along those lines, it's kind of minor. You can do this job. My thing is more than anything, it's just the treatment. It's the process, right? Again, I always refer to my guy, Jimmy Z. He says it best. He said that the punishment is not the penalty. The punishment is the process. So I always felt that if I want someone to do this job, you know what? Maybe if we went through how it actually feels. And again, I don't want to make it seem like it's everyone, because we are talking a small portion, a small fraction of the population that gets an IA or gets alleged misconduct. But the fact that you actually went through all this and how it feels, and at times, you're in dark moments, that kind of helps. It helps a little bit. At least that's my thought.
Yeah, it does help. I would have to agree with you that it does help. Now, we also have to understand that there's different levels of review. So when we talk about internal affairs does not impose penalty. The only person, as you know, that can impose penalty is the chief of police.
Correct.
Prior to that, they're all recommendations, all the way up to the top until it gets to the chief of police. He's the only one on the department that can impose penalty.
Yeah, and then you
Aside
and I.
from a board,
No,
obviously.
of course, and we can have a conversation about, if there is concurrence, parity, and sometimes there isn't, and I suppose that's where, it gets a little. The best way to describe it, in my opinion, would be, I wouldn't say so much tarnished. It's just, it seems unfair at times. I think you can agree with me that if you have a neglected duty in one division in LAPD and you have a neglected duty in another division, location LAPD, for whatever reason, it doesn't seem to be even, if you will. And again, it's not every case, but it just, sometimes that happens. That's all. However, let's take a trip down memory lane. I think that's super. This is kind of like my favorite part because we get to know you a little better.
Okay.
Let's see. Academy, October of 1993, and then you did your probation over at Hollenbeck. After your probationary period, you went to Southwest, in 1995. And then you made, congratulations, you got your stripes. You made P3 as an FTO in 1998. And then you went to the 1-4 Pacific, where we actually met. Congratulations. You promoted to sergeant in 2006, and you stayed there until 2008 when you transferred. That's what we call the wheel. We'll explain that a little later, to Wilshire Division. But you loved Pacific so much that you came back and were gangs, right? GED, Gangs Enforcement Division, back in Pacific from 2008, 2009, all the way until you got your upgrade. It's like another promotion to Sergeant 2 in Internal Affairs in 2013. And congratulations, you did, wow, dude, 11 years. And to watch, man, you retired in January of 2024.
I did.
Wow,
Yes.
Hey, let me ask you something. You were a young officer in Southwest in 1995. And it was at that time where they had Crash,
Yes.
the Rampart scandal just came out. Can you kind of just share a little bit about how the complaint system was then as it is to ever since post-Rampart scandal, if there was any difference when someone comes in and says, hey, I want to make a complaint against an officer?
Well, as you know, I was not a supervisor, but you hear of stories that happen when someone doesn't want to file a complaint and what the sergeants used to do, or even the watch commander used to do. And at that time, prior to us going on a consent decree, which was, I believe, in 2000.
Yeah,
somewhere
2000,
around there,
2001.
the system was a little different. The sergeants would log it in their log,
Yeah.
and they would do a fact sheet. I think that's what it was.
Something
called,
along those
like that.
lines.
And they would document it. And at that point, they would determine whether it was going to be a personnel complaint or not, or just something that they needed to document.
Yeah, they had the discretion.
Yes, there was discretion.
Yeah, and history shows that, 1997 when Chief Parks became chief, his special order number one, his first order, if you will, was we're done.
Yeah.
No more sergeant discretionary for complaints. We shall take every single complaint, no matter what it is. And
What it is, yes.
I have my opinions about that. That happened in 1997. Here we are in 2024. I think it's a little archaic. Me personally, I think that we should have sergeants. I think you're confident enough to know what is misconduct and what's not. And maybe there might be some flexibility. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I understand what you're saying. However, I think that documenting a person or a community member's complaint, to document it, and even if we think, or the sergeant thinks, no, this did not occur, and he has a way of classifying that complaint as soon as he takes it, which is something that we're doing now, as demonstrably false.
Correct.
You've documented that person's complaint, so you're not just kind of sweeping it under the carpet, so to speak.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
documenting it, and you're showing the public, hey, look, whatever complaint you have, we will take and we will document. So I kind of agree with that.
Yeah, and again, internally, it just kind of sucks. I was a complaint coordinator at Transit Services Division, MTA, before I retired, and gosh, I got to tell you, man, for all my LEPD people listening, is when you push, that button to create a CF number, man, it takes a while. Even an adjudication of demonstrably false, a DF, if you will, it just takes a while. And I teach at Savage Training Group an internal affairs officer involved shooting investigation course. And day one, it's all IA, and especially in Northern California, they actually have inquiries. So if you're listening out there, maybe we should do an inquiry. Maybe we should do LEPD form 128.1 and create somewhat of an inquiry, document the whole thing, right? Because we have a grace period. What is it, 15 days, 15 days? Yeah, and within those 15 days, if it just so happens to be a bunch of BS or it's just not true, at least you document it and file it away and call it a day. But for whatever reason, we have to push that number, and it just creates a lot of work. That's a whole different conversation in terms of the system. But yeah, I always felt that maybe now, after all these years, we can probably do something different.
I mean, that is a thought. That is a thought. I mean, I go back to transparency and what the public perceives from a police department. If they say, okay, well, you know what, I went in there, filed a complaint, and they chose not to take it.
Yeah.
That could come back on a police department,
Yeah.
and that's when we begin to lose that public trust.
No, 100%.
So,
No, totally understandable. FTO, right? 1998 in Southwest. What was that like?
I think that being an FTO is an incredible job because you have so much influence on the new officers that come in. You're training these new guys that are coming in, right? And when I was an FTO, I hate to admit this, but people took pride in, I fired that guy, I fired this guy. And the more guys you fired, the better training officer you were. I disagree with that 100%.
Yeah.
My job as a training officer is to get this guy that maybe is at a lower level and bring him up to that level where he's going to make probation. Educate him, teach him, so that he's a good officer.
Yeah, teaching is the challenge, right? I mean, if you had a probationary officer that was locked on, squared away, and did good police work, he was a good cop, I'm not going to diminish that and say that that's great teaching. Yeah. But I suppose it's challenging when you get someone who's struggling. And have you had someone that was struggled in the past?
I have. Yes, I have. I was a training officer for, almost 10 years, I believe it was.
Wow.
So because I was a training officer with a lot of tenure, every now and then when they had a probationary officer that was having issues with other training officers, they would say, okay, let's give him to Marty because hopefully he can help this guy out, or he's either going to make it or not going to make it. With Marty, we know that he likes to help these guys out and try to get them where they need to be.
Right.
Doesn't mean that I was going to give them a free pass.
Right.
But I taught them, and I got several that were right on the fence that I was able to bring up to a satisfactory level. And some of those guys, without mentioning any names, have become detectives and sergeants.
That's
on
awesome.
The department now.
No, that's something to be proud of. I couldn't agree with you more. Unfortunately, I did get my stripes. I was an FTO for 2 months, and then I made sergeant. So I never really had a probationary officer. That's one thing that I regret, or if I were to turn the clock back in my career, it would be to be an FTO and actually have a probationary officer that I can teach. That sounds very, very challenging. Talk to me. We met a sergeant, you and I, Pacific.
Yes, we did.
Wasn't that kind of cool? PCH, the beach.
I loved it. I'll tell you, I was at Southwest. Southwest is known for being a busy division.
Right.
When I was told that I was going to be wheeled or make sergeant, they're going to send me to Pacific, I'm thinking, I'm going to go to a place where it's going to be Sleepy Hollow.
Right.
Little did I know, it was pretty busy in Pacific.
Oh, my God.
And there was obviously a lot of crime there as well.
Yes.
And I was just going to be wearing a different hat as a supervisor now. But I enjoyed it.
No, totally. I look, man. The 2 years that I was there in patrol, I got to tell you, man, it was. If you can remember, I think at one point we worked graves. We
Yes,
worked what we call morning watches, graveyards, 6 p.m. to 6 in the morning. And wasn't it times where the minute we logged on, it was so busy that we had to take a lot of the service calls because there just wasn't enough,
Yes.
enough basic cars or officers responding. And next thing you know, from like 8 p.m. or 9 p.m. until like 4 in the morning, we're just hopping from call to call to call.
Handling calls. Just
And
like the
yeah,
officers.
pushing the sled. We were officers, man. Those were good times. And now what I like to do also is because I made it to internal first in 2011. You were there in 2013. You worked for the captain, right, for the commanding officer. So you pretty much, in your desk, practically every single complaint landed, and at some point, it had to be adjudicated and processed.
Correct.
Right, and I was an advocate. I was putting on these border rights. About the only question I have about that assignment is, could you share with us what was the most challenging part of being in internal affairs in that role? If you can share.
Yes, absolutely. In that role, the most challenging part is my goal and the goal of the commanding officers that I worked for. I'll say this before I get into what the challenging part was, is I had the distinct privilege of, as you said, almost 10 years at Internal Affairs. In those 10 years, I worked under 5 different commanding officers.
Wow.
So I was able to see things through different commanding officer perspectives. You know, and they have different ideas and they have a different leadership style. So that really gave me a lot of insight into a commanding officer's thinking and the way they think about handling internal affairs investigation. So I just thought I'd mention that because that was a distinct privilege that I was able to get from being there as long as I was.
And if I may interject, now that you mentioned that, did a lot change from year 1 to year 10 in terms of the process? What do you think? If any.
Yes, I think things changed, but not drastically.
Okay.
One of the things that we did do in internal affairs, because there was such a lack of staffing,
Yeah.
right? We just had very minimal staffing after a while, is that, as you know, we have the administrative internal affairs and we have the criminal side of well, we combined the two. And
Yes.
it became one division. We used to have 2 separate divisions, 2 different captains ran each division. We combined them. We still had 2 captains. However, it was just one internal affairs division rather than back then it was criminal investigation division, administrative investigation division.
Yeah.
And we became one.
And what about challenges? Or what became what you would consider to be a challenge?
I think the challenges is getting the investigators at a level that they needed to be good investigators. Because as you said, I pretty much, myself and my partner at the time, we would pretty much review every single investigation that came through. And we just wanted to make sure that they were thorough, complete, and that they had all the necessary, what would I say, all of the necessary things, if you will, for an adjudicator to come up with an appropriate adjudication.
Evidence, whatever the case may be.
Yes.
Yeah. No, man, it's quite challenging, and what I think people don't really understand about this big machine, because you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I was there from 2011 2015. I do know that in that era, we were looking at 3,000 plus, north of 3,000 public complaints. That's a lot. I've been told lately it's even more, 4,000 or 5,000. And to be thorough, to your point, to have that public trust, to be transparent. My thing is, well, let's create something preliminary as opposed to doing it, because you can agree with me that, and the stats that I can give is just during that era, that close to about 90%, even I think it was like 96% of all public complaints came back unfounded. It was adjudicated as unfounded, meaning that it didn't occur. And so That's a lot of work.
Yes, it is a lot of work.
You know, any thoughts about that?
Well, no, it's a lot of work, and again, it goes back to maybe creating a system, as you mentioned, where all these complaints that are frivolous complaints, because people get mad because they were stopped.
Yeah.
And now they're saying, I got stopped because of my race, whether I'm Hispanic or whatever race you are. Sometimes those things are not true. When you look at the body-worn video,
Yeah.
and the officer wasn't able to see who was in the car because the windows were tinted. So that's when you can adjudicate a complaint as demonstrably false.
Yeah.
It's still documented. It's documented that this person made a complaint. However, it's adjudicated immediately.
No, yeah, totally. No, 100%, man. I appreciate that. Hey, look, let's move on to the next segment, man. Talk to me worst and best. What we would like to know is your worst incident or worst radio call in your career.
The worst radio call in my career, I would say, happened when I was a probationary police officer.
Okay.
Okay. And I was working with a particular training officer, which will remain nameless.
Yeah, of course.
Right. And it was close to end of watch.
Uh-huh.
Right. And this is obviously back in 1994.
Okay.
And it was close to end of watch, and he tells me, press the button out to the station, meaning we're not available for calls.
Right.
And I was like, sir, but we're way over on the north side of the division. He says, press the button. I hit the button. Within just a few seconds, a shooting call comes out. And I was like, sir, there's a shooting call right down the street. Are we going to go to it? He's like, well, no, we're going in the opposite direction. Within 2 seconds, it was upgraded. Fire department needs assistance. Shots fired. So I told him, sir, are we not going? At that point, he says, okay, let's turn the car around. And we head out to the scene of the shooting. And the shooting happened right in front of a fire station. We get to the scene, and there was, if I remember correctly, there was 3 victims down. 3 were females, and they were all deceased.
Wow.
And a fire personnel came out. A particular firefighter came up to us, and he says, I couldn't believe what I saw. That's why I put out the call that we needed assistance. He says, I was looking down from the second story, and I see these girls get out of the car. One of them got on her knees and was begging this guy not to her. He had a she's on her knees, and he her right in the head. And at that moment, we set up crime scene tape, and again, back in '93, I hate to admit it, but we didn't have cell phones. We had pagers.
Right.
So this woman walks up with her another young lady, and she tells her daughter, or she tells me, she says, hey, I'm expecting my daughter to come home, and she hasn't come home. So she tells her young daughter or other daughter, go home and call her or page her. Next thing you know, the pager starts going off on one of the bodies, and this lady just freaks out. And I think that was one of the most difficult times on the department for me, because that stayed in my mind for weeks that, hey, could we avoided this if we had just made that U-turn earlier?
Yeah.
And so that's the worst call that I have ever responded to on the department.
Yeah, and you know what? Here we are. I mean, that's like 30 years ago.
30 years ago, and I still think about it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And as much as I don't like asking the worst incident or worst, thing that's happened in your career, there's so much to learn from that. And for me, as opposed, I can speak for the audience as well is that, you get to hear what the job is really all about.
Yes.
It's not people nowadays, it's great money, it's great benefits,
Yes.
but hey, you're going to be confronted with situations that are going to stay with you. And I suppose you can agree with me that if you experience that over and over and over again, it can affect you emotionally and mentally.
It definitely weighs on you. It really does. As I said, it's been 30 years, and I think about it, and people will ask me, and I always come up with this story because it really weighed on me quite a bit. Like I said, for weeks, I couldn't sleep.
Yeah.
And back then, we did have a BSS, Behavioral Sciences Division, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
But I didn't go to see the therapist. I did not. And, I'm able to deal with it, but it's just a very sad moment in my career.
Yeah. That's kind of like culture, right? We just,
Yes.
let's move on.
Let's move on.
Where I would say that, and again, you can agree with me that today, mental wellness is in the forefront.
Yes, it
You
is.
know?
Yes,
So
it is.
if you're listening, please, and you're experiencing something
Yes,
like
please.
that, you know what? Go out there and get the help you need to talk to someone about it and make it happen. And thanks for sharing that. I appreciate it. So let's switch. Give me something good, best reward, achievement that happened in your.
Well, I would have to go to a radio call also, just because it's something that I feel so proud of. Okay, so in fact, it wasn't even a radio call. It was an observation arrest that we made, my partner and I. I was working gangs. Back then it was called Crash, as you know, in Southwest Division. So my partner and I are working. We're driving around South Los Angeles, and we are in an area where it's predominantly African American at that time, right? And as we're driving, I see a male Hispanic and a female Hispanic standing at a bus stop waiting for the bus. And at that point, it was about 11. And I looked at my partner and I said, hey, does the bus even run this late? And he says, I don't know. And I said, those are 2 walking DR numbers, which is something that we used to say when you knew that they were going to be the victims of a crime.
Right.
I said, hey, let's do this. We're working Crash. We're in an unmarked unit. Let's park half a block away and just watch them for a while to see if anything happens
Okay.
while the bus gets there and picks them up. So there we are parked. And at that point, I see 3 young teenagers on bicycles, on 2 bicycles. So one's riding a bike, the other one's riding another bike, and he has a guy on the handlebars.
Okay.
So there's 3. They're on the opposite side of the street, right? The victims are on this side. They're riding their bikes. They were going westbound on Arlington at, I believe it was Vernon, if I remember correctly.
Nice. Okay.
And next thing I know, we're watching, and these guys cross the street and start going right towards the victims. And the guy on the handlebars jumps off the handlebars of the bicycle, goes into his waistband, pulls out a gun, and puts it to the male Hispanic's head, while the other ones are taking his wallet, taking all their they had
Belongings.
bags, all their belongings. And we see this, and we were in disbelief. So I told my partner, put out a help call. Officer needs help, robbery in progress at our location, right? And we start driving straight towards them. We put the takedown light from our car down so they could see that we were the police. And right when we get right in front of them, we both immediately jump out of the cars, take cover behind the doors, and at this point we draw down on these guys. They look at us and with somewhat of disbelief that, hey, is that the police? Who are these guys? And then they were probably able to see our badges and our uniforms. And at that point, they begin to run. One of the guys tosses the gun that he had. I go up and I push him. He falls forward. I take him into custody. And we were able to recover all the property that was taken from these guys and take these suspects into custody. I was so happy because they had taken a large amount of money from this guy. The guy had just gotten paid, the victim. And they took all his money. And he was so thankful that he says, they were going to take, that was my rent money. That was my food money. And he goes, I just got paid. So I feel really good. I felt like, hey, we really are serving the community, which is what we're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, and that's what comes with the job.
Yes.
That's, thanks for saying that, man. That's super rewarding, and I appreciate that. Look, Marty, got to know you a little bit. I appreciate all that. Look, I'm gonna leave the floor up to you. We're almost at the end of the episode. I'll leave the floor to give any advice that you have for anyone who's coming on the job. Look, man, you did 30 plus years. We can agree 30 years ago, it's not what it is today.
No, it's not.
So what kind of advice would you give someone who wants to get involved in law enforcement?
Well, the advice that I would give someone that wants to get involved in law enforcement would be that if that is your calling, do it. It's very, very difficult right now to be a police officer. As we all know, there's a lot of people that want to defund police departments. However, we have to remember that we have to give back to our communities. And for me, it was a very, very rewarding job. And if that's your calling, do it. If I had to do it all over again, I would definitely be a police officer.
Yeah, no.
I would do it all over again, even with the way the climate is today.
Yeah,
And Marlon, if I could add this, if you don't mind.
Yeah, of course, please.
As you know, I spent 30 years on the department. I did the drop program, everything else, and I have such a love for law enforcement that at this point I'm even considering going back on another program that they have. So
Yeah.
that's how much I love law enforcement, and anyone that wants to get into it, again, if that's your calling, do it, apply.
Good. But hey, you can't, retirement life is pretty good, right?
I love it. I love it.
Yeah,
Yes.
waking up and having a cup of coffee and,
Getting a workout,
the
going for a
only,
run.
you and I are tight, we're boys, but I do know, we both love soccer. And
Yes.
I do know that, I know your kid at one point played, and you guys were big old Barcelona fans. When I won't hate you for that, because I love Real Madrid, and hey man, thank you so much for showing up. We've been talking for quite some time to do this, and I'm glad we were able to get you in here to share a little bit about your experience and get to know you a little better. Muchas gracias. I really appreciate it.
It was a pleasure being here. Thank you very much for having me.
Before we wrap it up, we do have a little bit of an announcement. We do have a show, Capers. This show has pretty much guests coming in telling you episodes about really, really good police work, whether it's a crazy pursuit, a significant arrest. I mean, it's going to be a whirlwind, wow type of stories. Please go to YouTube channel and subscribe, and we'll be dropping episodes soon. So I wanted to make sure we get that out there. And of course, like always, please be safe out there, and don't forget to go Code 6. Thank you.